Good morning and welcome to another edition of Friday Focus. Thank you for joining us here on this Friday morning. This episode is another recorded version. We fluctuate between live and record just simply because the people that we're talking to or what's going on in the world at the time. So thank you for staying with us. We're getting very close to our 50th episode, but just thank you for joining us again this morning. And I'm reminding you, we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, we're on Substack, and we're on Spotify. If you're here with us, please do like, share, and subscribe. Get involved in the conversation. That's what we're here for. This is what this is about. Now, as a recorded session, normally we would bring your questions and your comments onto the screen. We can't this morning. So if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, please do comment on the conversation that we're going to get into. We do appreciate your comments and we will respond to you. Somebody in the team will get back to you, or I will respond to you as quickly as we can. So please don't feel, because this is a recorded session, that you're not involved. But please do. And the beauty of this social media is that you can get involved in what's going on. And I'm sure you'll be interested in getting involved in the conversation this morning. Now, I came across our guest today through watching podcasts and came across our guest as a podcaster and as a head teacher in the Middle East region. So I'd like to bring to the stage Kai Vatcher, principal of the British School in Muscat and Salalah. I'm not going to say any more than that. Kai, tell us a little bit about those two schools and this journey into the podcasting world.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. And thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast this morning. It's wonderful to be part of your podcast project. So British School, Muscat, British School, Salalah. Well, we're in Oman, so most people have heard of Dubai, and actually probably more people in the last few weeks have heard about Oman as well. You've heard about the Straits of Hormuz now, and I'm a geography teacher, so if you don't know where the Straits of Hormuz is now, then I'm not sure where you've been for the last couple of months. But we are not directly by the Straits of Hormuz. It's a little bit confusing because there is part of Oman which is opposite Iran in the Straits of Hormuz, but we're about 4 or 5 hours away from that part of the Gulf. So Oman, a very large country. Most of the population's in the north of Oman. So we're about 45 minutes fly from Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We're very different to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. You won't, as you fly into Muscat or Salalah or any part of Oman, you won't fly in and see big skyscrapers. There's nothing over 8 stories. So everything's very low-lying. We've got mountains in the north and in the south of the country. In between, huge expanses of desert, which is great to explore. We also have fantastic mountains. 2 or 3 hours from here are some of the most wonderful mountains that I've ever experienced hiking in my life, up to just over 3,000 meters. We've got over 3,000 kilometers of coastline. Not many countries can boast that, and it's beautiful coastline, as well as deserts and wadis. So it's quite a geographer's paradise, but it's also a part of the world where there is a wonderful culture and tradition, and the Omani people probably must be some of the most friendly in the world. And Oman has, I guess, re-established itself in the last few weeks, a bit like the Switzerland of the Middle East. It's a very peaceful country. The people are very peaceful, and they're very friendly, and it doesn't really tend to have any enemies, and that's why it's sort of carved out its position as peacemaker. So we have our largest school is here in Muscat. So Muscat is the capital by the coast in Oman. British School Muscat established like British School Salalah in the early 70s with a royal charter. Not many schools in the world, I think, have a royal charter, and that gives us a certain amount of freedom and autonomy to deliver British international education, which we can adapt to this context. So we're a school of just over 1,000, nearly 1,100 students here in Muscat. And in Salalah, again, that school was set up in the early 70s under the Royal Charter, but that school's smaller. That's got about 200 students. But both our schools are 3 to 18 and are very diverse and international. And we have great pride and joy celebrating that diversity.
And that's important to know. I mean, so when we're talking about education here, it is an all-through education system. So it's British education based. But I mean, it's really interesting that the charter part. I mean, I have been working with some schools actually in the UK that have the same charter because their patronage is to the Crown. But it does bring a different feature and a different world. But no, so how long have you been working in Oman?
This is my 15th year as principal of British School Muscat, and I've been principal of British School Salalah since 2019. So yeah, 15 years, quite a long time for a head teacher these days.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what you've described. And again, we must say, it's been a challenging time in the region, and you're safe and family is safe, and I've spoken to many leaders in the area, and the kind of the news might tell you one story, but there is another story behind as well. It's you are safe and everything's okay.
Yeah, well, particularly in Oman and in Muscat, we are, for now, we are very safe. Life is normal. Everybody is carrying out their business as they normally would. It's always a very lovely part of the world to live and work, and it's been like that for the last few weeks as well. So we've been very lucky that we've not been. There've been one or two small incidents, two down in Port Salalah, one in Duqm, but generally across the Sultanate, as it's also known, life has carried on very peacefully, as it always is here.
Absolutely, and it's good to hear that. So look, let's come to our conversation, and actually it's tied to something you said a moment ago about the point at which you became head teacher of the school in Salalah, and that was around 2019. So and that's part of the conversation that we've been having. So we titled this episode, rethinking schooling in a blended world, because your experience of working with Salalah came just as the pandemic, or just before the pandemic hit the school. What happened to the schools where you are in that period, and we'll get into what's happened as a result of that and some of the other things you've been talking about.
Yeah, well, we got formally involved with British School Salalah, so it was April, May 2019. We were told by the Ministry of Education that British School Salalah was our responsibility, and we very happily embraced that responsibility, that opportunity. And British School Salalah at that point had maybe just over 100 students, 120 students. There were 15, that's 15 in Key Stage 3. There was no Key Stage 4, there was no Key Stage 5. There was about 5 students in Year 7, 5 in Year 8, and 5 in Year 9. And I had been informally supporting the school a little bit for maybe 2 or 3 years. And there'd been this big debate going on about how do we grow the senior school? How could we do that? Can a school of this size have a senior school? Should we close this very small senior school down? Is it viable? So when I was flying down to Salalah, I mean, it's 1,000 kilometers from Muscat. Yeah. So you can drive. It's at least 10 hours. It's a long drive. The coastal drive is even longer, but quite fascinating. It's a great experience to do the coastal drive down there. But the drive down to Salalah, the flight down to Salalah, I'm thinking 15 students, there was quite a significant part of me thinking that's just not viable. I mean, when we came back some years back, you were thinking me six forms in the UK weren't viable commercially or economically unless you had say 120, 130, 150 students. How can you have a senior school of 15? So I was thinking, well, how does that work? Do we close it down? How's that going to sit with the community? Is one of the first things we do is close down the senior school. Anyway, so I went down to this parents meeting, and very quickly I'm talking to the parents of the 5 students in Year 9. They, I think, made a beeline for me at this coffee morning, and they said to me, they said, "Oh, Mr. Basher, we're so delighted. British School Muscat and British School Salalah are now working together, but what are you going to do for our children when they go into year 10 next year? I said, well, there is no year 10 and we have no GCSE program. Yes, we know that, Mr. Vasher, but what are you going to do? I said, well, clearly we can't provide a GCSE program for 5 students. We had at that point 2 teachers, a maths teacher, an English teacher, who were teaching these 15 students very much more like a primary school model. They were teaching everything, even though they were primary English specialists. I can't suddenly employ 10 specialist teachers. We understand that, Mr. Vasher, but what are you going to do? So they wouldn't stop. And I guess what I got to learn very quickly is that people, when they arrive in Salalah, and many people choose to go to Salalah, it was, again, a beautiful part of Oman, beautiful part of the Middle East. It has a fascinating culture, culture and climate. And basically in the summer, the place turns green. The temperature goes down to 25 degrees for 3 or 4 months. It rains and it's green, while the rest of the region is sweltering. So that's quite. That's called the Harif. That's quite interesting. But people choose to go there. If they choose to go there, Salalah, like I guess a lot of places around the world, it can grow on you, and you really get very fond of it, and you don't want to leave it. And there are families in Salalah who, like these parents, if we could not create some sort of solution for their children as they moved into year 10, they would have no other solution. And they would probably have had to leave Salalah. The whole family would have had to uproot and leave. So going from, economically, let's close it down, there was suddenly this responsibility. I felt I need to show to these families who are putting their trust in British School Muscat and Salalah to look after children, we must be able to come up with a solution. So I talked to my very creative director of technology at the time, Les Johnson, and we said, well, what can we do? Is there any way we can think about providing a solution? And he said, well, Kai, just think about it. You've got 2 teachers already. You've got maths and English, so we can do maths and English GCSE. What about, we've got a bit of, if we've got some flexibility with the science staff in Muscat, thousands of kilometres away, why don't those staff beam in and teach the children in Salalah the sciences? And then you've got 5 subjects. And when we did our research, we actually found that probably many, many universities around the world, you don't need more than 5 GCSEs, as long as you've got English and maths, especially if you've got English, maths and science. Many, many universities, that's good enough. And then if you've got A-levels or IB on top of that, you'll get in. So we thought, well, that meets the basic need. So we came up with this model with Les. We came up with this model where we thought, okay, roughly it was like a third face-to-face teaching with that English and maths teacher, a third online teaching, and a third independent study using Century Tech as a sort of AI-supported platform. So we went back to the parents a couple of months later, and we said, right, look, we've got this model. We're actually quite excited about it. We're also quite fearful because we're not sure what you're going to think about it. What do you think? So we laid out this model, and their main question was, are our children going to be in school for this blended approach? Yes, children will be in school all week, but some of the teaching's online, some of it's face-to-face, some of it's independent study. They're in school, perfect, very happy. And how much is it going to cost? It's going to cost the same price as you're currently paying for year 9. Perfect. Sold. So off we went.
It's really interesting because, like you, Kai, I mean, I've sought innovative solutions to problems of educating children for years. And I think back to my time in leadership in school, we were doing something similar. And actually, interestingly, it was around science teaching, finding science teachers to deliver. So getting people to, I was in a massive school, 2,500 children. We didn't have 20 scientists to deliver. So we were using scientists to double up classes. So we would do exactly as you said, beam them into another classroom. And the question there was, is it proper teaching? Was it real teaching? Well, what difference does it make? But it's that I think the key that I hear you, and I know we've talked this through previously, it's about talking to the parents and really being clear with them, what business would call your clients, the people that are actually buying the service, what they feel about it is kind of key. But it's really interesting that solution landed, and their only question was that were they in school, or were they being looked after in a school environment? How's that changed your thinking about this whole process?
Well, I'll give you another practical example. How's
Go
it
on,
changed
yeah.
my thinking? Well, I mean, I think, as you all know from being an innovator, yeah, that model has evolved year by year. We get feedback. I mean, it's by no means perfect, and every year we get feedback from staff, from students, from parents. So that model's evolved, but still, the essential sort of mix is there of basically it's a blend of face-to-face, online, and independent study. So one example of how that's changed not only my thinking but the colleagues I work with, when we were looking at extending our post-16 offer here a couple of years ago, and we like a lot of schools, with there's an interest in psychology. But to introduce psychology into our context here in Muscat, we've got a sixth form of about 150. But to introduce it, you'd have to first of all employ a psychology teacher. In the first year, they're going to be teaching 1 year 12 group. So in our curriculum model, that's like 4.5 hours a week.
Yep.
So we couldn't justify bringing over an expatriate psychology teacher to pay their accommodation and their visa and their flight, all those additional on costs you get with expatriate teachers for 4.5 hours of year 12. That's just not justifiable. And even if you move that into a second year, that's still only barely half a timetable.
Yeah.
But your on costs are not adjusted. You pay the on cost. We don't employ part-time expatriate teachers. They have to be full-time to justify all those on costs.
Yep.
So my head of senior school, Laura Bainbridge, who'd seen and was aware of what was going on in Salalah, said, well, why don't we think about having an online psychology teacher? It seems to be working well in Salalah. Why don't we do that here? So that's what we've done. So again, I think one of the differences, and I think this is important, I'd say in when colleagues out there around the world are thinking about, should I introduce some form of online provision or hybrid provision? In both these cases, we weren't responding to a crisis and saying, here's the solution to a crisis. We're saying this is a strategic decision to extend educational opportunity for young people.
Yeah.
And we are, certainly in the case of Muscat, and in the case of Salalah, we were offering it as an option. And so in Muscat, it's like we put it on the option form for the year 11 into year 12 students sort of 18 months ago. We made it clear from the outset that we were offering A-level psychology and it was going to be online. And so it was this, it was on the option form along with all the other option choices, and it was really clear that that's how we were going to provide it.
Yep.
And we have had no pushback from our parents or our students so far. We're nearly completed the first year. Laura came out of the. She talked to the students after they've just done their AS exam this morning,
Yep.
and they came out of that exam, and the students were feeling pretty good. Sometimes you can tell, can't you, when students come out of the exam, whether it's been how it's been, and they came out, and she said the students seemed pretty confident coming out of the exam. But what I also need to make clear is when we're talking about this blended approach, first of all, and one of the misconceptions we were talking about in the Educators Corner live edition yesterday, which you listened to, when we talk about hybrid, we're not meaning that students are learning from home or not learning from home all the time. Yeah. And in our online A-level psychology, the students are never at home. Like in Salalah, they're in school all the time. So we're not talking about learning at home. What we're also not talking about is necessarily the teacher being online all the time. So our psychology teacher this year with these year 12 students, I completely understand the concern around how do you develop professional relationships, personal interaction. And so what we do in our model is, with psychology, the teacher was here for the first 2 weeks of term. So she got to know the students in person, face to face. And I think we all know that when we've met in person, it's a lot easier then to communicate online. So she had 2 weeks with the students, start of the year, to get to know them. Then she came back in January, February, again for another week or two to check in with the students, meet again, develop that face-to-face relationship. And for the last 2 weeks, up until this AX exam, she's been here in Muscat, working with the students when they get into this really sort of pressure point and being there in person to support them in their final preparation. That's the students have really valued her being here for that time. So online or hybrid doesn't mean the students are necessarily at home.
No.
Online and hybrid doesn't mean the teacher is online all the time.
And I think that's one of the reasons why naming this broadcast, I referred to it as blended, because all of that, that it isn't just simply about being hybrid and online resource or AI driven platforms. It is that blended activity that respects human relationship, teacher pupil interaction, and all of the other technology that's out there. And we'll come to some of your other commentary on preparing teachers for that, but the practicality that's really useful for people that are thinking about it, to have that understanding that it isn't just simply an online, a talking head. I mean, we talked about this to some online experts around, there are children, particularly neurodiverse children, that find that particularly difficult to handle constantly. They need that variety. So it is one of the sensibilities of leadership to be aware it's not an easy, cheap solution. You need to find other routes and be mindful of the relationship that you're creating. Kai, in terms of what you've done there, I mean, obviously you're talking about Salalah being 1,000 kilometers away from where you are. And quite a distance. I was interested in something that you talked about yesterday on your podcast. And please, if you're listening and you go and find the Educators Corner, go and find Kai's profile on LinkedIn, because it's a really interesting conversation with Mark Steed on that journey. You talked about the number of learners and the kind of screen format. We're here with two faces and talking, but capacity of it. You've talked a lot about the number of learners that might be in a year group, and there's a lot of the work that we do within Smart Curriculum is on school efficiency and what that looks like. And this is a very different dynamic. So we can build that into sort of kind of models that we work on with schools. But what's the physicality of it? So how many learners did you have? Learners from different schools? So did Muscat and Salalah kind of blend together with just concentrating on the subject? What did that feel like?
No, I think it's a bit like meetings, really. Or it's a lot. If you're having a meeting with staff or with governors, it helps if everybody's in the same modality. So either everybody's online or everybody's face to face. So and I think I'm sure many teachers out there and leaders will have remembered COVID, where quite a few of us, we did try, especially as we're coming out of COVID, we tried to have, there were students who were still not physically in school, trying to access learning online while teachers were also trying to teach in the classroom at the same time. And I've tried to do professional learning like that as a facilitator. That's really challenging.
It is.
So what we're talking about in terms of the setup is the teacher is beaming into the classroom. So the students are in school. The students are in a classroom, and what we've found works best is when each child is on a laptop or a PC, and like we are now, or like I am now, I've got headphones and I've got a microphone. So when for example, I walk into the A-level psychology classroom, it's very quiet because they've all got headphones in, very quiet, and they're all listening, or if they're engaging with Heather, the teacher, they're doing that through their own laptop. So it's not one teacher beaming into a screen and whether 15, 20 kids. But certainly it's easier, and this is, I guess, where you start to open up the whole topic of what does online pedagogy look like. If you're trying to recreate a similar pedagogy that you'd have in a traditional classroom, it's easier to do that online with a smaller group of students. There's no doubt about that. But we're finding that a reasonably competent teacher in online pedagogy, and I think it is a evolution of the traditional craft. It's not a completely different way of working, but it is an evolution of that craft. That it's easier to do that with smaller numbers, but there's no reason. And if you look at the really successful online schools like Minerva or King's Inter High or Sophia, you can do that successfully with 20 odd students. You can, as you can in a traditional classroom, but it's easier if you're a novice online teacher to do that with a smaller number. But I think but when you go into thinking about online, you don't just have to think about replicating that traditional model. What it opens up to, as again we saw in COVID in some respects, if you think of the Joe Wicks model, where he's teaching thousands of people, there's no reason why, if it was a lecture style learning experience, there's no reason. I mean, the limit on that, there is no limit on how many people you can teach in a lecture version.
Well, we know that through the MIT MOOC program.
Exactly.
10,000 learners in an hour's lecture, but that's a lecture.
That's a lecture. So you could do that. So you could create a different type of learning model where you have a blend of lectures, but then either online or in person, a bit like the traditional university model, where you then have much smaller 1 to 5, tuition coaching sessions with groups of students, where you are really engaging much more deeply in that content and exploring it. And that's the bit about university I really enjoyed, was the tutorials, not the lectures. The lectures quite often struggled to engage, or I struggled to engage with lectures, but I loved the tutorials where we had a tutor who was promoting and provoking really stimulating discussion amongst us. I really enjoyed that. And so you could introduce that model alongside maybe more traditional classroom teaching, where you could have the lecture supported by the coach or the tutor, which is a different model. And universities have worked very successfully with that type of model for centuries, I think. Yes.
And that, I know, that in the sort of conversations that have been going on in this, that kind of opens the door to some different ways of thinking about schooling and how we might be looking at using our teaching staff differently. The efficiency of having a year group that you might be delivering to, or a particular group that are working on a subject that are vertical in delivery, not just their own year group, but it opens the door to some other ways of thinking about how we're educating.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm going to pause for a moment, Kai. Just do the part, but just come back to that and how that's changed your thinking in terms of, you said to me about buildings and how that's kind of shaped your way. So let me just do the part that we're here for. Now, thank you for being with us. Please do like, share, and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Substack or Spotify, please get involved in the conversation. I just need to drop in a couple of other elements. That in the work that we've been doing in Smart Curriculum, the 2 publications are now out. So the Perfect Timetable was published out in March, and now we're talking about how we're putting schools together as part of this conversation. And a lot of what we do within Smart Curriculum is focused on that element. The Perfect Timetable is not written for the timetabler; it's written for the leadership team. It's subtitled "Breaking into the Dark Art of Scheduling for Those Who Fear It." It's this whole idea of breaking the thinking around how we put schools together. And the previous copy, you'll know, the Efficient School is coming out in a paperback version in August. It's out in an ebook version if you're keen to read it. QR codes there. Please do get your copy and get into the conversation around what makes efficient school. Now, obviously, the conversations we're having here about what hybrid and blended schools might look like is going to have a huge impact on where schooling goes in the future. Now, that's not to say that it's revolutionary. It's going to be evolutionary, as Kai has referred to. So please do like, share, and subscribe. Get involved in the conversation. If you're watching this as the recorded version, leave a comment on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will get back to you as quickly as we're able to. Kai, thank you. Just on that when we were talking about this, you mentioned to me this whole idea of the design of the school changing and how it's changed your thinking around space and concentration. Tell us a little bit about what that's done in your thinking.
Yeah,
You remember
well,
that
yeah,
concept?
well, I'm feeling that I need to go and read your book, The Perfect Timetable. I mean, I've done a lot of timetabling. I've been involved in a lot of timetabling ever since I was a very enthusiastic head of department many years ago. And I guess one of the things I learned very quickly as an apprentice timetabler was how inflexible the timetable is, and when I worked with a wonderful professor, David Hargreaves, about 15 years ago.
Oh yes.
He said the timetabler very often in a school is the controller. Yeah. Because it's the timetabler when the innovative head teacher goes to the deputy head, let's say it's the timetabler or the assistant head or whoever it is, says, I want to do this, I want to do that. And traditionally the timetabler very often might say, no, you can't do that. Can't timetable it. Can't do that. Yep. And so they have a huge amount of control. So his vision for the ideal timetabler was a wizard and a mercurial character who, when the head teacher approached the timetabler and says, look, I'd really like to create this learning experience for young people, the timetabler's response would be, yeah, I'm sure we can create that solution, and somehow conjures up that solution. And you'll know, Chris, won't you, that there is always a solution in timetabling, but it's the cost. So I guess coming to your question about how is this starting to help me think about school design or school redesign? Well, I think what's become really clear for me is there is a demand, certainly in the workforce and the emerging workforce, and I think this will only get more and more, for more flexible approaches to working. We see this right across different sectors where working from home now in many sectors is part of the experience, not just working from home, working in different parts of the world. And if we're going to embrace that global societal shift in moving toward more flexible working, and at the same time meet a number of issues which are emerging in the young people who present themselves at our schools, whether it's mental health issues, neurodivergence. We've got real issues with attendance, particularly since COVID, and also student engagement, and that's probably been ongoing for longer than COVID. If we're going to address some of these really big issues, SEM provision for young people, and also for our work, if we're going to be more flexible in the way we approach young people and how we meet their needs, and if we're going to be more flexible in how we can create working opportunities for the workforce, we have to create schools that are more flexible. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you state it, but that's so. Once you start creating or blending online with face-to-face and if like independent study, once you start blending that, the tyranny of the timetabler starts to become significantly, or the tyranny of the timetable starts to become significantly reduced, and it starts to free up and create all sorts of possibilities.
That wasn't set up, Kai, and I did that was a genuine response, and I couldn't be more in agreement with you. And that's really what the perfect timetable is basically saying. We have created systems that are so rigid. In fact, special needs children are struggling because they can't cope with the rigidity, and we need more agile response to be able to resolve some of the things that the neurodiverse aren't necessarily fitted around going through 5 blocks in a day or 3 blocks in a day or whatever it is. They need stability. So that wasn't set up in any way, Kai.
It wasn't.
Thank you for what you've said. I know generally you've summed the book up entirely, and it's about leadership decisions around how that the blocking, because we want setting and ability grouping, is so restrictive because of the shape of it. I've been writing timetables for 35 years, and it's across multiple schools, and within the company we do that every year. I mean, we're writing that season right now in the UK, but it's what I'm saying to schools is what you're giving up in flexibility, you're losing in your ability to resolve issues that you're telling me are difficult. And so let's think about other ways of doing it. So the dimension of bringing blended delivery, the pedagogical aspect to it, is just a whole nother world of change.
So the magic key then to unlock the tyranny of the timetable is starting to blend face-to-face with online and independent study, especially face-to-face and online. The moment you do that, you create the flexibility which many schools want, their workforce would like, and their students need. And so when you start to do that, if you think of what a hybrid school might look like, so for a start, it could mean that you've got a whole group of students who are actually in school for the entire school week. It doesn't mean that we've got all students are at home. So you could have students who are in school all week. That's absolutely fine. It also could mean that you have other students who are maybe in school for maybe 20%, let's say 1 day a week, like they are at Duke's Hybrid Academy in London, and they're 80% at home. That's probably the maximum you'd want to try and allow. You'd want to get the students at least in for 1 day a week, but maybe a bit more. But what you could also have is any variation between that, between, if you like, full-time in school and let's say 20% in school, but you could have any variation between that. And I guess what Mark, Steve, and I have been thinking is that there are certain subjects, certainly to us, where you really need to be in a physical learning space and community to really get the best learning. So when we're talking about drama, art, music, practical science, sport, let's say those design and technology, those practical subjects. I mean, maybe we're being too traditional in our thinking, but at the moment we're thinking those spaces, those physical spaces, would be designed into the hybrid school. And what you may need less of are these very boring traditional boxes, which are used to deliver, not necessarily in a boring way, but these boxes which are content delivering boxes, whether it's science or history or geography or whatever those subjects might be, which don't need the practical spaces that those other subjects need. And those content delivery boxes, you probably need less of those, because some of the kids could be accessing that learning online from home, or some kids could be learning that accessing that learning online in school. But you don't need a box to put 20, 30 students in for that content learning. That could be done in a more office desk space type environment, which I think I saw demonstrated at High Tech High many years ago in California, where each student had their own sort of individual learning space where they can learn like we're interacting at the moment. So again, I think it frees up school design, where you actually, instead of thinking how we're going to cram 30, 40, 50 content delivery boxes into a space and some practical classrooms, you could really focus creatively on how do we design really engaging practical spaces for design, media, art, drama, science, and so on. And how do we also then create creatively socialization into that building? So you're thinking of the learning center in a very different way. And Jessica and Wiles, who sponsored our first Reimagining Schooling Conference back in January, they've done a piece of work where they really thought with a group of architects in their practice what this might look like. And they've come up with a prototype design, which you can access in the Reimagining Secondary Schooling report, which we published recently. And that's a really lovely piece of work that they've done there. Really. So
actually, so you mentioned that. So if people go to your profile, they can see the report and download it, can't they?
They can. Yeah, that's on my LinkedIn profile, freely downloadable.
Yeah, and I know there are a number of organisations that are looking at this, and it's certainly this whole conversation is changing the way that people are viewing school. And I think that the key word there you used was the socialisation space. It's not just the playground and then the classrooms. There are learning environments where children, particularly neurodiverse children or children that have social engagement issues, that they may need to find ways of getting over those. And so building schools that respect them and give them space to find themselves and learn and interact is really quite valuable. And I know there's lots of people that are really focusing on that. So I know this is a big question, Kaya, and it's, if you were starting from scratch, and I know when I asked you this question before, you said you'd start with the parents because it's all about, it's about the people that are buying. But what would you be thinking now? I mean, you've led us into it, but if you put it up, if you had that opportunity to start again, what would you be doing and what would you be thinking around the journey? I'm kind of thinking really as much as the teachers as the building.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked about curriculum or assessment really, and we've talked about the way in which young people engage with learning. But what came clear to me in an early part of my career, so I was in school, 2 state schools in the UK for 15 years, and then for nearly 10 years I worked for the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust based in London, doing a huge amount of school improvement work, working with people like I mentioned, like David Hargreaves, Guy Claxton, Dylan Williams, back in the noughties, and we were very much trying to redesign education around personalisation and using that as a driver. How do we personalise education? How do we take some of these academic ideas from people like Guy Claxton, Dylan Williams, and David Hargreaves, and how do we help schools put those into practice? And I did nearly a decade of that work. Absolutely fascinating, working right across the UK, visiting schools, looking at innovative practice. So I saw a lot of innovation, some of it done really well, some of it done not so well. But I learned a lot about sort of change, innovation, and I remember reflecting on that as I was getting ready for this job 15 years ago. What would I ask myself that, what's the most important thing that I've learned, that if we're going to really change things in a way that's meaningful, what's the biggest lever to generate change across the system? And you probably know what I'm going to say. Assessment.
Yeah. Because
assessment does drive so much of what goes on in schools. And so if I was somehow involved in redesigning an education system for a jurisdiction, how we assess young people and what we assess. I mean, what we assess is another debate, really, and what's the whole purpose of education.
It's a big one, yes.
Yeah. But how we assess, and I guess the key thing there, in the same way that online can unlock the tyranny of the timetable, creating a more flexible assessment system, so we haven't got thousands and thousands and thousands of young people all taking the same exam at exactly the same time. That also creates a tyranny to the school year.
Yep. Yes.
Interesting noise going through.
I was hoping that wasn't going to come through, but it has. Keep going.
Okay. So I guess creating an assessment system which not only assesses actually what we really need to assess to help young people prepare for the future, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but assessing it in a way that's flexible. And I guess, some of the models which I do really like are the model that's existed in music education for decades, where students learn and then are tested when they are ready. So you don't do grade 8 when when you're ready for grade. You only do grade 8 when your teacher thinks you're ready for grade 8. Yep. Or and if you need to keep doing grade 1 for a number, and I mean, maybe that's too simplistic, but I think as a principle, I really like that idea.
It's a mastery model, isn't it? So you're mastering something, and absolutely. Yeah.
And there's maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year where you can choose to take that assessment.
Yeah.
And it's a much more flexible approach to assessment, and it seems to generate a wonderful skill set amongst musicians. It seems to work really well. So maybe taking that sort of principle, maybe with the online piece as well. So again, there are different assessment models out there for MBAs and things like that, where online is actually being used pretty effectively for very expensive programs. So again, I think we just need to try and think more creatively about an assessment system, which one assesses what we really want students to learn, and also is much more flexible in the mechanics. So we don't get these log jams in the sort of the academic school year and the way that schools function and university entrance. It's very, very, so that's the thing I'd start with, because that drives what happens in classrooms, whether we like it or not.
And you're spot on with the kind of resonance of what we taught. I mean, I use the expression a lot, value what we measure what we value, because it gets us back to that question of, why are we measuring what we're measuring? Is it just because it's easy to measure it, or is it because it's the one thing that we want them to be measured on? And that methodology is so key. And we know, I mean, a speaker recently was on talking about the kind of journey to university education, and that is going to change. I mean, they actually said quite boldly, the 3-year degree is nearly dead, in the sense that, we're going to see not just the funding model because of the loan systems being problematic, but just the whole cost and efficiency of that whole process. And that in itself would massively change the kind of sequence of assessment that we might get into. And then how schools are going to respond to that will be interesting. If we're stuck in a logjam of, this is the way it's always been done, so that's what it's going to be, then we're going to lose the way forward. So I mean, you very skillfully got us onto that conversation about assessment. You mentioned curriculum. What do you think? I mean, very quickly, in terms of our conversation, is there a particular feel you have? You've said about using the online in particular subjects and blending it in. My experience in law and other A levels, you've done it in psychology. That kind of honing in on one particular practice, does it have an impact on the whole curriculum in terms of what you said about Salala and the 5 GCSE kind of endpoint? That speaks in a sense against the personalization that you refer to with David Hargreaves' work. But is there a feel for what a bigger curriculum might look like?
Well, I mean, sorry to bring it back to the sort of meta or the macro, but what I think we need in the UK, but we probably need a global discussion. And I got some really interesting feedback when I was pushing out some thoughts about this just under a year ago. I mean, the answer to that, for me, first of all, has to start with, what is the purpose of education? Because, you're asking me some quite challenging questions, absolutely. But if we don't have some sense of what the purpose of education is, what is the vision for our young people, and the purpose of what we're doing in schools, I think we should, in the UK. I mean, I'm leading a British international school. We very much follow mostly what's happening in the UK. I don't understand why there isn't the willingness to open up the discussion about what is the purpose of education. Because unless we're clear, or until we are clear about that, and we've got some agreement on that, and we're understanding where we're heading. If you're trying to lead a school without a vision, where you are leading anything without a vision, if you don't know where you're going, how can you plan the route? And so, being really clear about that vision for our young people and our vision for education, and what is the purpose of what we are doing in schools, 3 to 18? What's the purpose? I think we should be bold and brave and open-minded enough to have that discussion, and let's thrash that around and play around with the ideas and challenge each other. And for our young people, I think we need that debate. We really need that debate, because then from that, it becomes much easier to say, well, if that's our vision, if that's where we're heading, well, this is how we should shape the curriculum. And then if that's the curriculum, then this is how we can assess it. And this is the curriculum, the assessment. This is how we can design the pedagogy to support that. And this is how we can create schools to support that whole piece. But we have to start off with a vision. Otherwise, we're, moving the chairs on the Titanic, having no idea where the Titanic's going to.
I asked the question because I kind of knew that you were going to lead it that way, and I get that's the essence of a lot of what I've been saying with people. You start with your purpose. You can shuffle the chairs around on the deck, and I get the sense that a lot of what we're doing with performance tables and performance criteria, that is all it is. It's just what's easy to measure and what's the bit that we can put in, but really we need to be asking these bigger questions around why. What are we educating learners for? And it's not for the 18th century, and things have moved on, and we need to be educating learners for something that looks a bit different. And you certainly seem to be trying that within your schools within Oman.
We are doing our best, and we do have a very clear vision for our schools here. And we try very much to lean into that vision. But yeah, I would love to. So coming back to the question about what I would change or what I would do, the first thing I would do is open up that debate about what our vision should be, and maybe provoke a vision. Start off with a draft. This is what, as Secretary of State of Education or whatever my job would be, or Head of Innovation for British Education. This is what I'm suggesting, what I've been hearing. This is a draft vision. What do you think? And it would be a fantastic debate, because some of the best debates I've had, both online with educators from around the world, when we ask our parents, prospective parents, they come to our school and we say, well, what do you want from your child? You open up a fantastic discussion.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see how parents respond. And when I've had that quite recently, that debate with parents recently, they tend to hone in on what you call maybe the soft skills. They say, I want my child to be happy. I want them to be critical thinkers. I want them to be team players. I want them to develop their leadership skills. I want them to be able to manage their well-being. Those are the things they talk about.
That's really interesting that in listing that you've centered on I want my child to be rather than I want my child to know. That sense of a parent is all that they're going to be in the future is encapsulated in what this journey is, and that shapes the school.
And they do, obviously they do want their children to do well in exams, because they understand that has a currency in terms of their future employment prospects, and that becomes much more of a thing as those young people get nearer to their exams, and you obviously understand that. But I think that when you look at certainly education systems, secondary education systems, so much does seem to be geared around exams, and it's not that exams are not important. I mean, that assessment process, and I'm not suggesting we should get rid of exams, but it seems like, and I think Simon Sinek uses this phrase, or a phrase like this, where he says we're over-indexing on grades and assessment. That's not important, but we're over-indexing that. The volume's far too high, and the volume on, if you like, well-being and character traits and enabling young people to thrive as they go through their lives, the volume's down far too low. I think the volume's turning up a bit there, but we need to turn down the volume on exams and assessment and turn up the volume on well-being and character traits, character education. So there's more of a balance, much more of a balance. I think that's one way of thinking about it.
And it was interesting. Our last conversation was with Tom Harrison from the Jubilee Centre, and he was talking about the PISA tables and that, the drive to that, and how PISA are looking at a measurement that might look at character traits. But obviously, with the work in the Jubilee Centre, is that is their focus. But how that dial might be changed, so it isn't just simply academic knowledge, or even, that's probably a poor way of describing literate numeracy, because being literate and numerate is what we want every child to be. But that idea that there are some other elements that we might bring in, Kai, we haven't had the chance to say, and we're not going to sort of squeeze it in, but I know you were very clear in the conversations that we've had around this whole online learning being a requirement for teachers to get involved in. And it's not for every teacher. It's not every teacher is skilled at it. But I normally end the podcast by asking a guest to say, what one thing would you change? And I know when we talked before, you were saying teacher training needs to have an element of online in it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that is something that you've talked about. I just want to give you the opportunity to say that.
Well, I think if we integrated online pedagogy training into teacher training, and in our schools regularly also offer training for all our staff online, that will help us move towards a more flexible school, more flexible schools, this more flexible environment, which I see in the future. And I guess that's the key word for me, is if we can create, whatever it is in education, if we can create it more flexibly, that's going to benefit learners, that's going to benefit the workforce, that's going to benefit society. We need to create a more flexible approach. And straight away, with the moment teachers are learning their craft, that they understand that you can teach face-to-face, and that's a certain type of pedagogy, and then you can develop that pedagogy, and you can also teach really effectively online. That's going to help to create schools that are more flexible for their workforce and for the young people. And that will extend and enrich an opportunity for everybody.
And I guess that's probably where we should leave it, Kai. And I thank you for the conversation this morning. And I really appreciate your expert input into it and what you're doing in Oman. I wish you well, and I hope it grows and it becomes something that people will replicate and try and produce in other places, because it is going to be educating learners for a future that they're going to be experiencing. Yeah,
well, I think, Chris, I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to talk to you on your podcast. I think I'm not trying to be innovative necessarily. All I'm trying to do is solve problems with the tools that I've got available, so we can maximize the opportunity for the young people in our care. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity, Chris. Thank you for promoting the Educators Corner podcast. We're up to 30 episodes now, some way behind you, but I think we're in a similar sort of space where we're trying to promote innovative approaches. We're trying to promote a different way of thinking about education. So it's a real privilege to be part of your project, and I will check in with the perfect timetable. That sounds like a great read, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today, Chris.
No, a real pleasure. Thank you, Kai. Stay with me for a moment, and I'll just finish the podcast. Thank you. So, guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the conversation. As Kai's just said, I mean, it is about joining the conversation. All of these things. I've been doing this for 40 years or more in terms of as an educator, and we learn all the way. I mean, if we're not learning, we're not growing. So that's what this whole process is about. So thank you for joining us for the Friday Focus, this episode. Do get involved in the conversation. Leave your comments in the threads. Like, share, and subscribe, getting other people involved. We are broadcasting across the world, right around the globe. People are involved in the conversation. So please join us, and then get involved in some of the other conversations that are going on as we move through the year. Thanks for being here. We appreciate your joining us. We'll see you again soon. Get involved in the conversation.